Yes. So,
Hello.
hello. So yeah, basically, I wanted to ask you a bunch of questions around ClickUp and how to organize yourself as either an individual or a company to manage your tasks and your progress and kind of like everything and kind of the
Sure.
efficient way to do it. Because I've been like seeing what you guys do, and I've been using the same software in a completely
Yeah.
different manner,
Yeah.
and it just looks awful when I then compare it to what you've done.
Okay.
Because
All right.
basically, the way, maybe just to give, maybe it's a good idea, maybe to give a bit of a context to people to what ClickUp is, maybe.
Sure.
So, the way I say it, basically, it's software that has tried to put together all of the tools that management would need to do all of their tasks, but in a very efficient way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really modular in the way that you really decide how you use the tools they've provided you. So you decide which you want to use, how to use them, how to combine them. And basically, that's why, even though we're using the same software, I have a completely different approach than you have.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But that's basically it's a management tool, basically.
It's a task management tool. Yeah.
Task management tool. Okay.
So it's not just for people who hold a title of manager or who consider
No.
themselves to be a manager. It's a task management or project management tool, if you will, um, which we as IQM use to manage all of our work. So the development team, the designers, sysadmin, everyone, HR, leadership, everyone uses that to keep track of what they're working on, keep track of progress on projects, and we actually more and more integrate processes, workflows, policies into the system so that it kind of becomes the single source of truth in terms of where our business is at. So obviously, me as a leader, I use it to see what everybody's doing and how much capacity we have as a business and what's going on. But it's also a very useful tool for every individual contributor to see what they've got going on, and what they should be working on and what everybody else is working on.
Exactly. So, and on my point of view would be, I would use it as an individual, but who's
Yep.
managing projects myself.
Yep.
But then I'm doing the work as well. And the idea is, I'd like to have a way to kind of visualize what I've planned for the future, like all the things I want to do in the future, their
Sure.
progress, and also manage my kind of day-to-day tasks, but like in a kind of bi-weekly, um, I don't know, range or step, basically.
Yeah.
And but the plans like they have right now is I've only set it up like in sections. So for example, let's say I'd have like the web section where I'd manage like all of the websites that we have, and then maybe I
Yeah.
have like the security sections where I'll manage, I don't know, certain aspects of the security, and then I
Yeah.
just have the tasks in there, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I lose a lot of visibility on like overall what's going on, and
Yeah.
it's, I don't know, it doesn't feel awesome in the sense that it's just like a to-do list. It ends
Mm-hmm.
up just being a to-do list in different parts, but I don't feel progress. I don't have kind of like a vision on what I'm gonna do, when I'm gonna do it. I mean, even though I can put the dates, it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't group together nicely, basically. And I like the way you've set it up with the roadmap, with the sprints, with kind of like the opportunities as well.
Okay. So I'm not 100% clear on what you're struggling with or what you're trying to solve. I'm starting to get an idea, but yeah.
And so maybe my question was, how do you build up but basically, how do you come from one idea and then build it up into what you've done? So let's say
In terms of our implementation.
yes,
Right. Okay.
because that's what I'm
Uh,
struggling a bit, like where do I start from, where do I put it, and then how do I, from knowing that I want to do this,
yeah.
where do I have to put it, and how do I link everything together so it works magically well?
um, so I think one of the things that's helped us quite a bit is that we have built into our sprints the retrospective. which means that every week, if someone has something in the process that they would like to change, then they can raise it and we can quickly implement it relatively quickly. So, over the last, I guess, bit more than a year now, since we've implemented ClickUp, a year and a half-ish, every week there are little changes that are made to get to the place where we're at and that we're happy with it. Now, don't get me wrong, the rough initial setup of saying we have spaces by sort of business unit, if you will, or business function and products, that's been there since the start. The division between the sprint lists, which are actually the tasks, and the roadmap, which is effectively the overview of projects, that's been there since the start. But the relationship between them and how they're structured and how I track progress on them has evolved. And so what we used to before have one list per sprint, and now it's just one list for all sprints, where we just use due dates to differentiate different periods from each other. And what we do now as well is, because ClickUp has implemented subtasks in multiple lists, is that we use the roadmap item as a parent task, and under the roadmap item, we then put the work as a subtask, and the subtask is also in the sprint list. So when I do my reporting on the roadmap list, I just look at the projects. And then if I look at the sprint list, I just see the work as individual tasks, but I can always track the relationship between the two. So if I go onto the roadmap item, I can see that we've budgeted, let's say, 25 sprint points for that specific roadmap item, and that we've already done 7 of them. Now, I have less of a need to track progress of individual projects because of the agile project management that we do, where everything is broken down into very small units. So something is either done or it isn't done. There's very little in between.
And so now, because now I'm trying to remember that. So if you, in your sprints, you said now that you have only one specific, so you said it's a subtask from your roadmap, right? That's,
yeah.
Okay.
So do you want me to share my screen with you?
Yeah, sure.
So let's say I look at my roadmap, the one that I use most, right? So these are the projects for this specific client, where I see all of the in-progress projects, which are all in the roadmap. And so you see they're categorized. So this is a custom field that we have created. They're categorized as epics, which is sort of container projects. And then within that specific project, you'll have objectives, which are phases of the project. And then if I go within this part of it, then I've got the stories, which are the individual events, if you will, that are happening, the individual things that are happening. And then within those, I then have the work.
Okay.
And so all of the work are the individual tasks that you see, have 1 or 2 sprint points, and they also show up in the sprint list. But if I then go in the sprint list, they show up in my to-do list, if you will, the one that you mentioned before. So I have a combination of both. And then what you mentioned is having that overview and seeing the progress towards that overview. So what I just showed you now is within the spaces. So that's all these icons on the left.
Okay.
And a lot of what I do happens in the everything view.
Okay.
So that's where we are right now. So you see here, everything. So basically in the roadmap, what I do is then I go and I filter by location, and I say, show me all of the roadmap folders.
So inside of each one of the spaces, you've created like a roadmap, and then you only select those. Oh, okay. Cool.
Correct. So every person who manages their own space, now this is obviously because we're working with a bigger team, If one of the product owners is managing their own product space, they just manage their roadmap, which is very practical for them to see what's coming up and to communicate with me through that roadmap. But I use the everything view to see what everybody is up to, right? And then within that everything view, I can see what projects I'm involved in. So if I use the me view, then it filters down and I just see what I've got going on. And this is very useful, these assignees and the assignee view, where I can basically see even projects that I'm not in the lead for, but that I'm involved in. And because we've got this custom field that's called roadmap owner, so if I put me, right, I go to my me view, you see all of these ones are projects that I'm in the lead for, but I'm also involved in a project that Stuart's in the lead for, and I'm also involved in 2 projects that Mark's in the lead for.
Okay.
So I'll have less involvement in those, but I still need to be aware that those are going on. And I can do the same for any of the other team members, right? So if I look at Stuart, I can see, okay, well, this is what Stuart's got going on.
Nice.
Right?
And so, but that kind of tracks like over time what people are going to be working on, what you have worked on. Do you have a way to actually see, let's say you have like an epic, how, like, because do you have basically when you create an epic and all of the sub tasks in it?
Yeah.
But do you create them all no, actually, do you create them every week basically? So there isn't an end yet created from the beginning, obviously.
It depends on the project.
Okay.
So there are projects that have a very clear end, right?
Okay.
They have a very clear end objective. And so those ones from the get-go, I will be able to break them down into phases. Now, I won't go into super granular detail of stuff that's very far away.
Okay.
Because, again, of this agile approach, uncertainty and stuff might happen.
And so, for example, like on because you guys do weekly sprints, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every week you'll be creating those new tasks that are going to be added, right? And the question I have now is...
Yes and no. Yes and no. Okay. So in an ideal world, I come into the sprint planning and I already have the tasks created.
Okay.
So basically what you do is you refine the backlog as you go and as things get planned. And then when I go into the planning, then I just have to double check, okay, is this realistic in terms of workload? Have I missed anything? Are there any other projects going on for which I don't have any tasks? Should I delegate something? Should I pick up something from someone else? So this part that I'm showing you, the roadmap stuff, I'm not looking at on a weekly basis in the planning. This I don't touch in the planning. The only thing I touch in the planning is the sprint list.
Okay.
This happens when we agree on the project planning, right? Which happens either when I have an interaction with a customer that's going to influence that when we commit to stuff, and we have a monthly roadmap review, in which case we see, okay, well, is the roadmap still okay? Which is sort of a sanity check. Mm-hmm. And usually there are some tweaks that need to happen if there are conflicts in there.
Okay.
And it allows us to look 3 months ahead. We normally do a 3-month horizon to see, okay, do we need to now break down some of those tasks into a more granular level?
Okay. So you wouldn't come to the roadmap every week to see what's going to be done in that sprint. You'll
you would look at it.
But you wouldn't
create the roadmap exists before that already.
I see. Okay.
Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of planning and looking ahead, right? It needs to be done before.
And so the other thing I wasn't completely sure about when I was looking at your stuff was, so how do you use exactly the backlog? I know you mentioned it a bit now, but how do you exactly use it?
Right. So the backlog in terms of products, right? So in terms of products that we already have is in the form of user stories, which are basically features that either we would like to make or that the customers have asked us to make. And then when we get up to a new release, we'll go through this list with the customer, tell them, right, we can do this many points, right? We can do X many points. So we think within this release, we'll be able to do this part of the backlog, right? What we will do is we will review with them whether our current assessment of the priority is correct. Usually some of these user stories move down, some of the user stories move up. And then we agree on a target scope. Now, our customers are aware that there is uncertainty in this, so it might be that some stuff gets done more quickly, and so we get to do more, and that some stuff might get done more slowly, and so we get to do a little bit less, which is why it's important to have that prioritization. And so what we do is we go through this whole backlog with them, right? And that happens for most of our products every 6 months, so twice a year, where we then also cull the backlog. So anything that's no longer relevant gets thrown out. And all of these tasks that have been sprint pointed is that they've actually already been broken down into tasks that can get picked up by a developer straight away.
And what about a backlog that would be for just tasks for your sysadmin or you, for example, that are not related to a product, or not related to a client directly?
Give me an example.
I don't know. You gotta update some servers, for example. Would that be an item that would go into the backlog or not really?
That would go into the roadmap. So the backlog, we only have something that is called the backlog for products. If something is a substantial task that needs to be planned in by me and prioritized by me as the strategy lead, then it goes into the roadmap. And then I look at the roadmap, I see when we have time to work on it. If it's a small task, then sysadmin in this case just plans it in their next sprint and they just do it, right? But for me, when I look at my roadmap, you'll see that it's a mix. Obviously, you wouldn't know this because you don't know what all these things mean.
No.
So that's pretty much how it works. The roadmap is the way of managing the backlog, because then when I move around stuff in terms of priority, I also know how much time it's going to take and who needs to be involved in it. So I don't want to say, yes, this is important, let's work on it, if I can't tell you when I'm going to work on it. That kind of defeats the purpose for me.
Yeah.
Right? And anything that's not in the roadmap, I don't put anywhere, because that's just creating a list of stuff you'll never get around to. So we used to do that, right? We started like that with Mark, where we started in Trello and then we transferred it into ClickUp, where within a few weeks we had a list of 100 things we wanted to do. This is not a figure of speech. We literally had 100 things that we wanted to do. And that's just depressing. Every time you go into your list and you see those 100 things, and the list becomes longer, because it's super easy to have ideas and it's very hard to execute them. And in the beginning you think, oh, but what if I forget that idea? And it's such a brilliant idea. Well, listen, if it's such a brilliant idea, it's going to be at the top of your list and you're going to do it. If it's not at the top of the list, you don't have to remember it, because by the time it becomes really important, you'll come up with that idea again. Or otherwise, it wasn't that brilliant, you know? And so sort of to counterbalance that in terms of risk mitigation and all of that stuff is obviously the business observations pipeline that we've set up recently with the ISMS and the ISO certification, where we say, well, some things are important to keep track of, that we have observed them and that we have made a decision as a company not to pursue anything or not to do anything with them straight away, but we need to keep an audit trail of saying, well, we've accepted that this is okay and for us not to action it. So this is sort of our place where stuff goes that we don't want to action straight away, but we want to be aware of, and this then gets reviewed on a regular basis. But the sort of cool ideas, let's do something with them, go through a very, very ruthless prioritization process and get thrown out. Here, what I'm showing you now, 10, 20 ideas will come in, one will stay in, and the rest just disappears. It just goes away because it just creates unnecessary pressure on you to execute on all those ideas, which won't happen. Will just never happen.
Okay. It's definitely a lot more clear now.
Is it?
Yeah,
because I'm not sure we've spoken a lot about the stuff that you were talking about.
But still, so basically everything goes from the main list that you've created, where you create the different epics, and then from there you create all of the stories and everything, and then every sprint you just look at the roadmap, decide what you're gonna do, you add the items, and that's it. You don't have like thousands of items waiting for you to put them in the sprint.
No.
Which is what I have right. So when you describe the hundreds of items,
frustrating.
It's super frustrating because I'm like, okay, this all of this, I don't really know where to go. It just looks like it's never gonna end, basically.
Exactly.
Nice. And when you create your roadmap, do you define straight away the dates, or you only do it, like you said, once every month or something like that? Because one of the things as well that I struggle with is after I've created all of the, let's say, epics and all of the subtasks, is giving them timelines. How do you manage that?
So what I do is I give them approximate durations. So for instance, for me, the testing of a prototype takes 2 weeks between the scheduling of the test with the users and doing the tests. So I will put in a start date and an end date for those because I want to see how big it is on my planning, right? On my roadmap. And then I can move it back and forth. So anything that's more than 2 or 3 weeks away is likely to get pushed back or forth 1 or 2 days. But I'm not going to change the length of it because that is my estimate of how much work is required and how long it's going to take, which is not the same thing, right? So for instance, this release, depending on whether it moves forward or backward, it will coincide with holidays for some of our developers. So then it will have to take more or less time because I've got less manpower on it. But if that doesn't happen, it's always going to take 2 weeks, right? It's always going to be a 2-week release. And whether it starts on Friday or whether it starts on Tuesday, doesn't matter. It's always going to take 2 weeks. And, for instance, this sprint, we had a big disruption last week, big sysadmin disruption on Friday, which meant that 2 sprints got disrupted and they needed to have time added to it. Now, that meant that I added this sprint, which is basically, you see it's called work slot 3. The one last week was called work slot 2, and this one just got extended by 5 working days, and then I had to rejig the roadmap. This is what I'm telling you is that, sometimes stuff needs to change in the roadmap. That's the nature of things. But everything behind that kept the same duration.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
It just got moved back or moved forward because it's a higher or a lower priority. And from my experience, right, I'm telling the way I talk about it, I appreciate sounds like I've got it all figured out. I don't, right?
You still
and
tweak it.
we're continuously improving it because a lot of the things that I've shown you now have only been in place for a few weeks because they're the latest iteration of the way that we do things. They're not radical changes. They're version 2.13.3.15. You know what I mean, right? For instance, for me, the latest iteration that I've shown you of all of this stuff that's on my name, right? That's a very recent change because actually me being the person who owns the roadmap and the person who does the work is very bad because I never had a sanity check on, is this a reasonable workload for you? I do it for other people, and so other people's workload is absolutely reasonable, and I ended up doing stupid amounts of work just because I thought, yeah, sure, I can do that. That fits in. And then I've committed that to a customer, and then I have to do it because that's the way I work, right?
Yes. So how do you do it now?
And so now I force myself to plan more ahead in more granular detail. So what I've just shown you of breaking it down from an epic to an objective to a story and attaching a value to that story, I didn't used to do that. I used to break it down up to objective and not add a point value. Which meant that I wasn't aware of being already at 40 points for a week even though I should be at a cruising speed of 33 or something, or 30, even before starting the week. And I can guarantee there's going to be disruptions and another 5 points that come in during the week. So that puts me at 45 points, which means some stuff's going to drop. It always happens. So what happens now is I do that planning, which makes me more aware of, for instance, this week is going to be fun, right? And as soon as I want to commit to a new project or a new engagement with a customer or with someone else, first I look at the roadmap, which I did anyway, but now I've got more information on there. And secondly, I now have to ask someone else of the team. It's not because someone else is managing me or supervising me. It's just to make sure that I'm not being silly. In the same way as I work as a safeguard for other people on my team, that we're not committing to anything silly for them, right? When I'm committing development work to a customer, I ask the developers, what's your estimate on how much time this is going to take? I put it in the roadmap, and then we have a realistic estimate. That doesn't happen if you're both the judge and executioner, if you will, right? You need to separate those.
Yeah, which is kind of like my situation. Sometimes like I do allocate too much, or sometimes like I think something's going to take a lot of time and actually ends up not being enough, and then like I end up having a small week or like not even assign enough tasks for that week. But yeah, that's rare. Okay,
I offered it to someone else that we work with on a freelance or contractor basis, because when you're working more independently, it's harder to keep sort of a planning routine and that kind of stuff. I offered to him to piggyback on our rituals, what they're called, Scrum Rituals. So if you want to do your planning like we do from Wednesday to Tuesday, and you just want to start your Wednesday morning doing your planning and just sitting in the meeting with us and maybe having, I'm happy to review your planned work, even if I don't know what the work is, just in terms of how much work you're going to do on what days, etc. Just to have that accountability to someone else. From my perspective, you're welcome to join in and just to use that infrastructure, if you will, that we've put in place. You don't have to take it, right? There's no obligation d'achat, but I know that sometimes it can be useful.
No, for sure. I'll definitely think about it. I think I'll try to set up first the whole thing, see something that I like, and then probably I'll take on your offer and join you on Wednesday mornings.
Cool. No worries.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think for now it's time for me to implement it. I don't think I have many more questions before I actually go and do it, and then I'll probably come back with more.
Sure. And we haven't even spoken about some of the things that I find the most sexy about our ClickUp implementation, which are all of the custom fields and the relationships between tasks and stuff.
So there was a small one as well that I had, is because I'm working on the free one, and I was wondering as well, what did you get other than, because I know there's some of the automation. I haven't looked at all of the features, but what are you getting from the fact that you guys are on the premium version? Because first of all, already visually, yours looks a lot more appealing than mine.
Oh, really? Yeah. I think you can change that.
Yeah?
So,
okay.
Here, layout, size, and style, you can configure that as you want. And it's just me who's chosen this. I don't think that's a feature of being a paid customer.
But
I just think the default is
it's more like small things, like even on the tasks, things show and things like some stuff like that. I don't know.
No, but really, if you
just the layout.
Here,
okay.
So you can, the size of things.
You can.
It's basically how compact it is, and it's everywhere in the app, right?
Okay.
And this is just the UI, and I like this one. But so what we get out of it, yes, we use the automations, but we don't use an excessive amount of them. Without it, it would be really annoying to use ClickUp, because a lot of the automations is applying templates, and it's basically making sure we don't forget stuff. And if we had to do it manually, then stuff would get forgotten more often. But it's small stuff like tagging things and putting stuff in the right list and applying the right templates. Having unlimited custom fields is great because it means I don't ask myself the question if I want to create a new custom field or not. I just create it, and if I don't use it, then I just remove it again, right? So especially for all of the pipelines, all of the pipelines that we're so proud of, they all use custom fields. So they're all a custom field dropdown, which then makes it sort of the alternative to a status. And I think that's pretty much it. The rest of the stuff that we do, I think, are free features. Apart from being able to share with guests and stuff, but that's a limited use, because even in the free version, I think you've got
some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that we do, especially for products. So the user story thing that I've shown you has a public view. Right, so I don't know where that is now. Where's share? Yeah. So the public link, you can configure what you see in the public view and what you don't see in the public view.
Okay.
Right, so that's useful for us as we use it also as an external communication tool. But I don't think that is a must or necessarily.
No, I mean, especially because I'm mostly going to be using as like more like my own manager tool, basically, of my tasks and projects, but still.
So for instance, in this view, this is a custom field, 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 this is a custom field. But you don't need those. You can do it. It just makes our life a bit easier, but you can do a hell of a lot with tags, which is a free feature. You could use the priority field that is within ClickUp, which I don't like, but you can use it. And by linking stuff and putting stuff in the description, and you can do checklists, which are great as well. And all of the subtask stuff, you can do that as well. And that's the biggest features that we use is subtasks in multiple lists, the everything view, and relationships between tasks.
Yep.
That's pretty much the biggest that we use.
Okay. Yeah, and all of these are free actually, so.
Yeah, I know.
So that's awesome.
On the other side, it's that, we live in this. I have this open all day, every day, and I go into it, I don't know how many times a day. And so I think it's normal that we get sort of the professional version of it to really get the benefits out of it.
For sure.
Right.
Awesome. That's been great. Super helpful.
Because I
had already worked with you guys and I saw it, but it's then different when I was trying to implement it myself. It didn't feel as clear on how I like how to build it up from the ground up. So now it's a lot more clear on how. So yeah, awesome.
I think the big thing with ClickUp is the views. Mm-hmm. So it's not that much the tasks, it's how you look at the tasks. And so getting a view that's useful for you is the biggest thing. And I experiment with this all the time. So for instance, they released a new calendar view. So I made a calendar view to see, okay, well, would this help me in any way? Right. And so I played around a bit with it, and I'm like, okay, well, I can see kind of on a weekly basis what I'm working on, how many points it's going to do, but it doesn't roll up subtasks. So no, not useful for me right now. We use the Gantt view for Woohoo. So I thought, okay, let me try it out for IQM. It shows me the spaces first and I need to expand. That's really bad. I don't like that. However, you can see here that it's got this completion bar, which means that it might be something that you're interested in, right? So it's really about you creating the views that work for you. And I know everybody in the team uses different views. So Stuart lives in this view and in the calendar view. So he looks, when he does his planning, he sees what days am I at capacity, what days am I over capacity, and you can determine yourself how many points can I do in a week, right? And then it breaks it down based on the tasks and when the tasks are going on, etc. And this doesn't work for me. It doesn't add much value, but Stuart spends a lot of time in here. And I live in my actual calendar, and Stuart lives in the ClickUp calendar, right? And I use the sprint list to review my tasks, and other people use the sprint dashboard to review their tasks. So it's really up to everybody's preference, which is, I think, really the strength of ClickUp, is that the data is the same for everyone. but the way that you visualize it is different. All right. Well, thank you. And I'm curious to see what you come up with.
Yeah, definitely. I'll showcase it to you as soon as I'm done with it, and I'm pleased with what I've done.
Yeah, please do.
Awesome, mate.